Rapid City Economic Development and Civic Improvement Funds annual meeting, more commonly known as 2012. Jackie, can you take a roll call, please?
Justin Pizarro.
Croy.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Adcock. Here. Hurlbeck.
Here.
Chapman.
Here.
Weifenbach.
Here.
Olson. Here. Kroger.
Here.
Quaker.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. We're going to start off this meeting with a review of the 2012 spreadsheet, and then we'll open up the meeting for public comment. Mr. Preston?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the spreadsheet that you should have on the dais. It looks like this. Unfortunately, it won't all fit onto the overhead and where you can see it, but this is column C, with lists on the left-hand side what the items are. The first one is sources of fund, and then actual that was spent in 2007, and then budgeted for 2008. I'm going to talk about 2008, and if somebody wants to go to a different area, please let me know, but just kind of give you an idea of where, how this spreadsheet works. Under the budget, 2008, that's for the year we're in, the fund balance at the beginning of the
Mr.
year
Preston,
was,
before you get fully started, we do have a council member who'd like to speak. We'll go to Alderman Johnson.
Just a quick question regarding 2007. Are the actuals in 2007, do they represent all the sales tax collectors? That's still an estimate.
that, if I could,
Mr. Preston?
that is the actual amount that we collected in 2007, that $9,228,000.
Okay, I just wanted to dispose of that before we moved on to 2008. Thank you.
Okay,
Mr. Preston?
thank you. The budget beginning of the year was, balance was $31,857, or, excuse me, $32,800,000 or $666,377, okay? And then we added that to sales tax receipt, which is an estimate for this year, almost 9.6. Interest earned, we're figuring 3%, $949,000. The golf clubhouse, $29,000. What that is come back from the association. We had to deal with them where if we make some improvements, they'll take part of their capital improvement funds and help pay this off. So the sources we have is $42 million. Then under the uses, we got the arts facility, which we did spend 1.4 in 2007, and 2008 we're planning on spending 1.9. That includes any carryover that we may have from 2007. Under Homeless Coalition, $250,000. That's uncommitted at this time. Or excuse me, it's not spent, but it is committed to that facility. The Canyon Lake restoration, the bypass, we've got $400,000. The school zone safety flashers, $160,344 not spent yet. Traffic signals, $411,000. And then we go down to economic development. The total is 3.7. The 1 million represents some carried forward that was not spent in 2007. And we have the parking ramps, 2.8. The soccer fields, $3.8 million, and the civic center, $15 million for the total of $25,600,000. The powwow facilities, $802,000. The streets, which include a number of streets, to include Kansas City Street and excuse me, the school mine streets, etc., is in those figures there. The total of a little over $8 million. And parks, we have over $1.5 million. And then DCA charges. DCA stands for Design, Construction, Administration. That is essentially what we pay our engineers here. Instead of taking those funds out of general fund, we pay for their services from those projects that we do for the 2012 fund. The next one down, there's 300, let's see, I gotta get down there, I'm sorry. Getting ahead of myself. Am I going too fast, Mr. Chairman, or?
No.
Okay. Next one down is the $383,000. That is our debt service payment for the bond that we did for the Civic Center, $8 million bond here in '07. And then the debt service was for the large bond that we did in '05. So we have the total uses over 38 million, leaves our balance of 3.6. And you can go through to the rest of the sheets that you have up there and see where we're projecting the revenue to come from and the plan that was laid out by the council far as how the funds are to be expended. The only other thing I would like to point out is, I went too far. In 2010, and this sheet is not, I must have pulled up the wrong sheet, folks, I'm sorry. But it is, according to the sheet you have there, $2,190,000 is our low. This is probably the sheet that I sent out initially to you, and I pulled up the wrong one, and I certainly pull up the right one here for you, but it was just off by a few $100,000 or so because of some adjustments we had to make. But on your sheets is the correct amount of $2,190,000 is the low balance. Are there any questions on this?
We do have some questions. We'll go to Councilmember Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Refresh my memory. I don't remember what the golf facility is.
Is RJ in here? What's that? You want to address that, what the golf course project was?
Oh, the golf cart storage. Okay. If this is the golf cart storage?
I believe this is repayment for the clubhouse, which was a project from the last
Okay.
session.
All right, thank you, because in this current session, there was nothing for golf, as
Right.
far as I remember.
This is revenue, though, so this would be a payback.
Gotcha, thank you very much, okay.
Karen, anything else? We'll go to Alderman Johnson.
I know we just got through the 2008 budgeted. Actually, some of these projects I don't think will be completed in 2008. I think it's appropriate that we have a discussion as to if they'll be funded in 2008. If not, put them into the appropriate years, number one. And number two, when does this current 5-year plan end? Is it actually, 2010? Am I correct in that?
You are correct.
So essentially, we're at this point, unless we make some kind of a change in how we look at 2012, we're looking at through 2010 then, nothing beyond.
If I could, Mr. Chairman.
Mr.
The
Preston.
5-year plan has been on 5-year cycles starting with 1995 and 2000 and 2005. The bonds are 7-year bonds, so there's a little bit of difference when we talk about the bonds. Thank you.
Thank you, but for in terms of what we're going to do on this spreadsheet tonight, or what we can do, without some change, we can go to 2010. Thank you. If we can have a discussion as to each one of these items identified in 2008, if these projects will actually move forward in that year. If not, I think we should take some action to move the money to the next year, whatever year is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Johnson. Are there any other questions for Mr. Preston? We'll go to Alderman Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mike, I have a question on the debt service repayments for, since I'm not familiar with them, and we're making debt service payments from 2007 issues and 2005 issues. You went a little bit fast for me to understand what those were. I would like to ask Mr. Preston to explain that to me again.
Mr. Preston?
Okay. Thank you. In 2005, when we started the next 5-year plan, we did go out for a 7-year bond for $35 million. And the debt service that we've got plugged in there on that very last line is the amount of principal and interest that we need to pay off that bond. I probably misspoke. There wasn't a 35 million. The total debt service on that is 35 million. The bond was probably closer to 32 million or something like that.
Mr. Weifenbach?
Yeah, what do we use the funds for?
We use the funds to fund the projects that are under the uses of funds, such as the economic development, the streets, and the arts, etc.
Okay, I think I understand. So we bonded, and took the money up front, and then we're using the tax receipts to pay back the debt service.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Preston? According to our ordinance, it says that the council shall at least annually conduct public hearings after giving notice thereof to consider proposed amendments to the plan. I don't have any speaker request forms, but at this time I said after Mr. Preston made his presentation that I would open up to the public if there are some public comments, and then we're going to go to the council to do that, have that discussion about amendments to the plan or other things that the council would like to see. Mr. Preston.
I'm going to take this off so we light it up here, if that's all right.
Sure. I have no speaker request forms. That would be the reason why I might not have any then. If you'd like to speak, then by all means, then come up to the microphone. I will just have you identify yourself if you'd like to speak.
I would move to open the public hearing.
It's been moved and seconded to open the public hearing. Any discussion? We'll go to Alderman Quaker. All in favor? Indicate by saying aye. All opposed? The motion carries. We're in the public hearing comment period. Mr. Myhouse?
Jim Meyerhouse, and I represent the Black Hills Business Development Center. As you all are aware, we're continuing to do build out there. We're continuing to attract companies, and we have been using up to the last build out some of the 2012 funds to finish that up to help augment that. We've been using it with an arrangement with the people that are renting, that if they are successful businesses upon their departure, we recapture that and then bring it back to the fund. Our most recent one was the chemical lab, which we submitted a request for $120,000 and some change. And the point here being, we understood that the fund for the Economic Development Capture Fund had been expended, but we did want that to show that we still need it, and so we really feel strongly that this is needs to maintain its integrity in some fashion down the road, because, for instance, in that particular project, the Chem Lab, we had 6 full-time equivalents. We got an average payroll of $43,000. Got $3 million of private funds in there with equipment and funding that. And we did the build out for $275. We asked for $120. And of course, there was no funds for that for this year. Not complaining about that. We understand what happened, but
I had the wrong notes.
please continue. What I'm suggesting is don't forget that particular fund, because it really has increased. And I submitted to all of you at year end the impact that's already happened with the Business Development Center. And that's good jobs, high paying jobs, and a lot of good potential. So would really enjoin you to continue to think about it. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Meyerhouse. Yes, we do have a question from Councilmember Olson.
In describing the activity that's going on at the Black Hills Business Development Center, my understanding is you now have enough businesses that are located that the current building will be totally filled within.
Well, right now I'm estimating in 2009 the current building should be filled, yes. I have three more companies that I'm talking with presently, and that represents 33 FTE. They're all engineering, science, and technicians jobs. One is a group out of Norway. Another is a group out of California, and that has already, the group out of California has a funding out of DARPA for the manufacture of electronic sensors. They intend to start yet this summer with 10 FTE to begin with 20 by the end of the year. The other is the Norway company will be running a similar profile of people coming in. They're in the process of relocating some people here from Norway. I believe your question was, how are we promoting it?
And just how, I mean, I know that you anticipate that soon, I mean, there was conversation about the possibility of needing a second building
Yes.
to accommodate.
And, if you consider it to be filled by 2009, the first graduation should be from 3 to 5 years from the start. We obviously started, we're just coming up on the second year, so we're out there. Now, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that all of them are going to make it through the 5th year. Some of them will make it, some of them won't. But the point is, we'll have very little capacity once it's filled for about a 4 or 5 year period. So we'd be better off if we were at least considering that.
Karen, anything else?
Yeah, the other question I was answering, when those businesses leave, I mean, what is their commitment to the community as they grow their businesses and actually move out of this?
They really don't have a commitment, but history tells us from observing the accelerators and throughout the nation that about 90% of those companies stay in the local area. Those that don't, of the ones that are successful, that other 10% are either sold and integrated into the community or they go elsewhere, obviously. But a good high percentage will stay in the area. And when you think about it, that's pretty logical, because you take Evans and Sutherland, for instance, which is our laser projector people. They already have suppliers and welders and those kinds of people right here in the community that, in fact, there's 2 companies that have moved here. There's very small companies that are doing precision manufacturing for them. They moved here from Salt Lake. So they have about another 6. They're not in the incubator, but they're supplying that company because they're associated with it. So, there is that effect of what happens.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you, Jim. Others? State your name, please.
My name's Bob Demersman, and I'm president of the Rapid City Economic Development Partnership. And I just wanted to expand on Jim's comments a little bit, that in addition to the build-out in the incubator, which is certainly main part of our thrust is to grow our own, we've also provided 2 training grants for companies. One, Northrop Grumman, which is in the process of hiring 75 engineers and technicians. We attended a meeting this week, and they apprised us of a new program where they're going to hire engineers here to work on software that they've developed throughout the country. And it's interesting. Some of them go to work at 9 o'clock at night to serve their clients throughout the world. So there's a lot of stuff happening. In addition to Northrop Grumman, we've also provided a training grant for AccuPress, which is, if you'll recall, moved their research and development arm here about 5 years ago. We provided them a rapid fund loan. They've paid that back, and now we've provided a grant for training. And they're hiring engineers. They've got 2 young people as interns from the School of Mines, and they're hiring machinists, which they've attracted from eastern South Dakota. They're all paying above the $40,000 wage. But I just want to let you know that in addition to what's happening in the incubator, we're also looking at growing some industry too. So thank you. Any questions? Thank you.
Dan Michael, 3828 Clifton Street.
Thank you, Dan.
On last week, there was a special council meeting with respect to the Canyon Lake spillway. And one of the council members made mention of the possibility of 2012 funds being used in the repair of the spillway. Will that be something that will be addressed during the balance of this meeting, possibly?
I understand that the chair understands that we're in public comment and you generally don't respond, but I mean, I think there's some latitude in this meeting as we just took place.
I'm not asking for response, but I just.
But I will respond.
That was one of my questions. And then with $4 a gasoline, $4 a gallon gasoline coming up, do the people that are working the numbers, are they looking at that because there's going to be a definite decline in sales tax revenue? And that's a concern I have. And finally, the Economic Development Futures Fund. What is that exactly? Is that like economic development? The economic development.
I'll answer your questions, Dan. The spillway issue was voted on and was voted not to send to this meeting, but I'm sure there's something on the agenda that says other projects. If council members would like to have some of that discussion tonight, surely we can. I'll keep it limited to 2012. The other one about the Futures Fund, it kind of mirrors the state's future funds, which money went to Economic Development Partnership in hopes of capturing future opportunities for the community as they relate to jobs and relate to bringing companies and training and that sort of thing to town. And that's what that money has been primarily used for, as Mr. Meyerhouse and Mr. Demersman talked about.
So that is tax dollars that has gone to the economic development, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Any other comments from the floor? The chair would entertain a motion to close the public hearing. It's been moved and seconded to close the public hearing. Any discussion? Deb, are you wanting to discuss that? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion carries. Next we'll go to Councilmember Hadcock.
We had put 400,000 for the Canyon Lake restoration bypass system. And I was wondering if that came off of any of the infrastructure or how we were putting it on 2012 and where that money was coming from.
Is that a question for someone in particular?
Or Robert or
Mr. Preston?
Preston.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, could you restate that question again?
The 400,000 that's in 2008, Jim says Canyon Lake restoration bypass system. Is that coming off of something that we used for infrastructure or anything like that, or we're just, I mean,
Mr. Preston?
why is that a line item at this point without anybody putting it on there? How about that?
I think I can quickly answer. That has always been in this 2012 plan. That's not something we just added. That was in here since we adopted the plan in 2005.
And that, oh, so that was back, that was the money back from 2000. Okay, I remember that now. I apologize. I thought it was something that we were adding from our new 2012. Okay, sorry about that, Jim. I should have known that, and I did, and for some reason I had a brain fart on it, so thank you.
No problem.
We'll go to Councilmember Olson.
Thank you. In addition, as we talked about, that project specifically was brought forward by the Black Hills Fly Fishers. their interest was in preserving the quality of the fishery below the dam. And they really did come into the 2012 committee and made a strong argument for the value of that project, and it was approved. And yes, and Ron Kroger is telling me they also pledged a substantial amount of money in addition to the dollars that are part of 2012. So that was brought forward by someone specifically.
Any other council lights on? We will get to council members to have further discussion about this year of 2012 or projects that you'd want to see added or other things. I know there were some things that Mr. Preston had that he wanted to make requests for. I do have council member lights on now. If we're going to go in a different direction, do you want to speak now or do you want to hear the request from Mr. Preston first? I want to speak now. Okay. We'll go to Alderman Quaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One item that was brought up a couple of weeks ago that the council had asked was for a column to be added for O&M costs. Can you advise of the status of that?
Mr. Preston?
I believe what Mr. Quaker is referring to is when Mr. Johnson comes forward once a month and talks off of this sheet right here, you'd requested an O&M cost. Mr. Johnson, at his next briefing, will be bringing forward the sheet that from the initial one that shows the O&M cost from when the council approved these costs and share that information with you at that time.
Sam, just to piggyback on that, this was the one that was on the website, so this is an older copy. I just had Kate print these off to give to council members, so if that update is in the works, this is not from that, but I fully expect that it should be there the next time we have a 2012 meeting. Mr. Preston.
Just so you understand, he's going to bring forward, he's got a sheet similar to this, but it was one initially with the O&M costs, and he'll bring that and present that to the council, those sheets.
Add what Mr. Quaker has asked on a couple of occasions is that that column be put permanently on this sheet so that we can track O&M costs as we move forward as well. So I think that was his request.
My understanding is Mr. Johnson, we talked today earlier about this, was going to bring that information and see if this is the right information that you want on it before he changes the information. Am I putting words in your mouth, or is that correct? Okay. He says that's correct.
Okay. Sam, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also have a question relating to a 2012 project that isn't listed on here, but I think that's probably because it's a prior round, and that is there was some discussion and concern a few years ago regarding usage of and coordinated usage of the boxing club, and I was just wondering the status of that and how that facility was being utilized, and if it's still being utilized to its fullest extent. And if an answer is not possible tonight, that's fine. If we could just get an answer later, but I haven't heard much discussion on that in quite some time.
Mr. Preston?
The answer is not possible for me. I'm not familiar with that. Maybe Mr. Johnson, you have any idea? It might be something that Mr. Cole would have to come forward and speak on that. But essentially, you want to know what the status is of the boxing club building.
Yeah, is it being utilized, and are things working pretty well with the program?
Okay, I'll have to ask him that question and have him comment on that sometime.
It's not necessary. It's not part of this plan. We don't need to.
Thank you. Then
Sam, anything else?
I just have a general statement, and I think it fits in well right here. I would like to ask the council to keep in mind the following item as it relates to discussion of 2012. Many other cities in South Dakota also utilize the second penny of sales tax, and they collect it. In most cases, that second penny is devoted entirely to capital improvements. Here in Rapid City, we dedicate half to capital improvements and half to 2012. And I think the 2012 program has been a great program. One of the reasons that I have had so much concern regarding 2012 is because of the O&M costs not being included. They are now being included in further discussion. But I think the council needs to take a look at two issues going forward. One is how to handle future requests for funding, and also how to handle the issue of operation and maintenance costs, whether those costs should actually come out of the general fund budget or whether those should come out of the 2012 budget. And I think that that's a worthwhile discussion to be having. But you know, it's often been said in the community that 2012 is a special resource that no other communities have. Well, that's not exactly the case. The reality is that it's part of that second penny. We have just chosen instead to call it capital improvements, to call it 2012. And I think that looking at the fact that we have rising costs of construction projects, rising costs of fuel, and also a number of other needs that the community needs to deal with, including Canyon Lake and water system improvements, we need to be very careful regarding items 2 and 3 and other projects about removing or allocating more funds out of a fund that is already strained. And you know, I know that this gets into a difficult discussion because it can often appear that people are against one project and for another, but I'd like us to take a step back and look at this from the big picture and the big perspective that we have a responsibility to make sure that 2012 going forward is used responsibly, and part of that is making sure that the O&M costs don't creep up and all of a sudden create undue pressure on the general fund budget. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Before I go to Alderman Johnson, I have a question for our city attorney. From a process standpoint, there are some requests on here this evening. If the 2012 committee approves those requests, is that approval just then a recommendation to the council? So we're not actually approving them tonight here. That approval that will then go through some process, legal and finance or something, to then get on the council's agenda. Is that correct?
That's correct. The 2012 committee is a recommending body to the council, so any action you take here tonight would follow your normal committee process before presentation to the council.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Alderman Johnson.
I would respectfully request again that we take a look at the 2008 year, determine if those projects will move forward. If not, that we move those to the years we expect them to go through. So I would like to individually go through those lines. Determining when the projects move forward also has to do with the funding that's available. And I think before we move any projects forward or consider any projects, we ought to know what's available. So I would again respectfully ask that we take a look at the projects one by one and have a discussion if we expect those to move forward, and ask Mr. Preston to make those changes on his computer. That way we can have an accurate look at the 2012 program, and I would expect that we would adopt those changes as well. So I don't know that it needs to be a motion, but I believe that we can put that back on the screen, and Mr. Preston can go through it in conjunction with Rod Johnson, who's been referred to as Mr. Johnson, which has not been me so far, but just so the people in the audience know that. There's a couple of Johnsons here. But I think that would be our first order of business.
The chair doesn't have a problem with that request. I don't know if the rest of the council wants to do that. That's why I ask, is that in the form of a motion to direct this to take place? I don't have a problem with that. How does the rest of the committee feel? Okay. Mr. Preston?
You want me to go ahead and put this up on here?
Yes, please.
First, I would like to say, like the old saying goes, I thought I was wrong, but I was mistaken. I wasn't. Your sheets do match what I have on the overhead. I was reading off an old note, so my apologies.
Thank you. Mr. Tom Johnson's request is that we look at the projects that were allocated funds or for 2008, go through those projects, I guess with a yay or a nay if we think that those projects will still be, move forward in 2008, and then have discussion on each one of those that we think possibly will be moved.
Mr. Chairman, and also in the discussion, there may be some funds expended in 2008, some spent in 2009, but I would just like the spreadsheet to reflect what the reality is.
Mr. Preston, before we get started with that, let me just ask, are there projects that you think will not go forward? And we can definitely go through the projects, but are we expecting any of these projects or any of these groups that are in the plan to not go forward with their projects in 2008? Do we know of any of those?
I'm going to ask RJ to respond to that question. If that's
Let's
all
just
right,
go
Mr.
through them. Let's just go through them.
The first one is the arts facility. Of course, that includes the Dahl addition, and it also includes the community theater groups, their requests.
The Dahl project, of course, is in progress, will be completed this year. The project, as far as the theater is concerned, my understanding is in discussions with the school district, and it is proceeding. I don't know at what pace.
Before we move on,
Mr.
Alderman
Chairman.
Johnson.
Excuse me.
Just to try and speed the process, I assume the 1.9 million is the Dahl portion of it. We expect to expend that in 2008. Is that correct?
I would say
Preston?
all but 250,000 of that, because you noticed in 2009 it shows 3 million, and as you're aware, those numbers were split out 3,250,000 each way.
So this is what I'm looking at. If we don't expect to expend the 250,000 in 2008, it shouldn't be there. And my question would be, based upon where we're at, is it possible to actually design and build the arts facility and complete it in 2009? Is that a realistic look?
I don't think that's realistic in terms of total design and construction, period. You're looking at a 2-year period.
Mayor Hanks?
I'll see if I can add a little bit to this. In reference to Alderman Johnson's question, I would encourage you to leave the $250,000 in there. That's design money. We're waiting on the school district to come back with their master facility plan. We expect to see that within the month. If indeed everything moves forward, we plan on being in design, and the goal would to actually have, if indeed we move forward with a joint facility between the performing arts and the school district, we would estimate that we hopefully could complete it by the end of 2009. So I think the numbers are correct in their current form.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Johnson, you still have the floor if you had another question about
Based on
one.
that is the information I'm looking for. The mayor believes that we can construct it and get it completed by 2009. I think it's aggressive, but having heard that, I would leave those numbers there.
Okay. Mr. Preston, Mr. Johnson?
Homeless Coalition.
I'm not aware of any movement on that project.
The next one?
Mr.
Do
Chairman,
you want to leave that there?
the
or-
question is, should we leave it at 250,000 if we haven't had any request in 2008?
Tom, I understand what you're trying to do is to segment some of the monies, but, you know, we've set, these groups are in the plan. If this $250,000 for the Homeless Coalition is to, and I can't remember right offhand exactly what that was going for, if we move that money tonight or recommend to the council that that money's moved, they come in here a month from now and say, well, we're ready to go. I fear that then we'll be bouncing back and forth trying to move the money back into this calendar year or this fiscal year, which I think could potentially be some problems for the council. So I'm not sure, without all of these 2012 groups represented tonight, to tell the status of where they are in their projects or where they are in their thinking. I'm not sure what we get to by going through, you know, this particular exercise. So I would caution us on moving monies, especially if the groups aren't here. We'll go to Alderman Weifenbach, and then we'll come back.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have
Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. I'm used to, you look good there anyway. But,
Thank you.
all right. Sorry, Alan. I have a tendency to agree with Alderman Johnson. These are 5-year plans. We are in the 3rd year of a five-year plan. We have announced we are going to have a 2012 annual meeting, March 31st, 2008. Today is March 31st, 2008. I would like to know, number one, is the Homeless Coalition still in existence? Or, I mean, where do they stand? I think it's a fair question tonight that we have some answers to some of these, and whether we move the fundings around. And I mean, I think it's a good question. I think that opens the dialogue to where I'd like to be when I leave this room tonight, to have some kind of understanding of. Otherwise, this whole meeting is fruitless for me if we can't get to some sort of conclusions on where these people are at in their projects, and whether we should move on, because obviously there is issues of whether you call them operating maintenance issues, all the issues that we're looking at. Without that dialogue, I don't think we get anywhere tonight. And so I'd just like to see some. I can't understand why some of these groups aren't here telling us what's going on after 3 years.
We've got a lot of lights on the board, but I will make a comment. I talked to council members today who didn't know we had a meeting tonight. So I question if the groups knew that we had a meeting, when council members who set the meeting didn't know we had a meeting tonight. We're going to finish the lights on the board, and then we'll go.
Well, can I respond to that?
Absolutely.
It's not so much important in the meeting. It's 3 years into the projects. That's. I mean, there should be some sort of information. Tonight was the first time, that we may see some of this stuff. I mean, after 3 years, I think that they would have some sort of idea whether they were going forward with their projects, or if they would have gave us that information a month ago, or 6 months ago, or a year ago, or if they're going to give it to us yesterday. I think that's where I'm getting to. So thank you.
Next, we'll go to Councilmember Hurlbut.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Alderman Whiffenbach and Johnson about wanting to identify some of the projects that may not be moving forward. Although I also agree with the chair that I think it would be unwise to remove items tonight. What I think we can do is go through and flag certain items for further investigation as to not only are they going to proceed in 2008, but also are they going to come in within budget. I think with rising construction costs and gas costs, I think we need to analyze whether our entire spreadsheet remains viable on an ongoing basis. And I think that's probably going to require another meeting. I think we need to flag items of concern tonight and then get the information presented at a subsequent meeting is my suggestion. And that's my thoughts at this point.
Thank you, Alderman Hurlbut. Next, we'll go to Councilmember Olson.
I understand where the council's going generally, but this meeting traditionally, as it's occurred in the past, has just been an update. And in fact, we really haven't asked for reports from the organizations. And those who are scheduled for years ahead often are still, they don't come and report, so I don't think that's unusual that they're not here this evening. In regard to the Homeless Coalition, I think it's important under the projects that what it's looking for is various grants and rent for residents. So this doesn't fit into the same kind of construction sort of element that other projects do. So I guess I'm in agreement with Malcolm that this would be a place to still leave the Homeless Coalition numbers where they are. But I don't disagree with Tom Johnson that there are some things in this list that we know pretty clearly are not moving forward in calendar year 2008, and that was what I saw Tom as being concerned about, rather than trying to second guess why someone's not here today and in terms of their project. There are some things we definitely know, and if that's the case, so I think we should take a more cursory view of this and just move through the list, and I think we will arrive at the point that Tom is describing, which is there will be a few changes, but by and large, this has not been a comprehensive reporting meeting in the past, and I think that's why no one's expectation was to be here tonight.
Thank you, Karen. We'll go back to Alderman Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's correct. I want to be clear that my proposal is not to take someone off the list or defund them. My proposal is to adequately reflect if they're going to draw some money in a particular year. If we don't expect them to, move them a year, plug them in correctly. I just want to be clear of that. And if we expect them to come in, that's fine. I'm not aware of any discussion is my concern, so I kind of doubt whether they're going to come in. I'm okay with leaving them, but there are certainly, as Alderperson Olson said, there are some projects we know that aren't going to happen this year or be fully funded this year. So if you want to leave this one, I'm fine with it. But I think at some point, it's incumbent on some of these organizations to have some dialogue and discussion that says, yes, we're moving forward. Yes, we have some idea where we're going.
Thank you. I guess we just had some discussion about the homeless coalition and $250,000. So what would the council or the committee like to do with that item then? Karen said it's for various grants and rent.
What was the
Mr.
question?
Preston, we'll go to Mr. Preston.
I was going to say, maybe to help get started, Alderman Johnson asked the question initially, and I wasn't quick enough to respond to what I think he was asking. But these two projects here, the school zone flashers and the traffic signals, the LED upgrades, and unless Mr. Ellis or RJ says I'm incorrect on those projects were completed in '07 and spent. And you do have a copy of the letter, which I do address the LED portion of this thing, where they did a lot of that work in-house, and so they did not have to spend that $411,000. As far as I understand, those two amounts in 2008 could be deleted and not affect those projects. Am I correct, RJ? Okay. Mr. Ellis and RJ agree that we could delete those because those will not be expended in 08. Those projects are completed. Is that kind of what you were looking for, Alderman Johnson?
The chair would request that if you have a question, that the
I'm
questions
sorry.
come through the chair. We'll go to Alderman Weifenbach.
Thank you. My question would be is, can we just request that somebody from this organization give us an update for the future? That way we can move on?
Sure.
Because it doesn't seem that anybody here knows. So
Sure.
I'm not sure who I'd make that request to, but I guess I'll make that
It's
request.
noted.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Councilmember Hadcock.
I guess, I think that's what Ron just asked. What's the homeless coalition? And number two, in budget in 2008, the 160, 344, and 411, 666, we did use all the money, or do we have any money left out of that?
If I could, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Preston?
Those are funds that are left over that were not spent for those projects.
So it's 500,
571,000, 572,000 there total.
that we won't be using for flashers or LEDs, it's just extra
That's
left over
correct.
from that. Okay, thank you. And the homeless coalition, does anybody have? Sorry, Mr. Kroger.
Deb, you still have the floor.
Again, what is the homeless coalition, the 250?
The only thing that I guess I can offer is on an original spreadsheet, it says rehab or construct transitional living facility. So I think, you know, we're talking about actual construction dollars. That's as familiar as I am with the project.
Thank you,
For
Mr. Johnson.
transition- For like the Teton Coalition and those kind, I guess do you know, Mr. Kroger, the answer?
It seems as, the chair's
Sorry.
just going to take, it seems as if we don't have a full grasp today of what that is. I guess we could go get our 2012 book from the caucus room and go through that. Mr. Weifenbach asked that we maybe come back to that, put it on an agenda.
good. Thank you.
And come back to that particular one and ask that organization what their plans are, where they are in the process.
Can I ask one more thing?
Mrs. Hadcock?
Can we use the 5 whatever for other projects then?
The chair's going to I think it was helpful, the line of thinking that Mr. Johnson, Alderman Johnson was going on to take each project at a time. Later on our agenda is a request to use that money for something else. I think, Mr. Preston, you're setting yourself up to have the council spend that money before you even get a chance to make your request for what you'd like to use the money for by saying that that money is available. My recommendation to the committee is to let's go down through the list first. Let's go through the entire list, and if you want to come back and start saying let's use the money for X, Y, or Z, let Mr. Preston and Mr. Johnson just make it through the bottom of the list.
But
before
Mr.
we-
Chapman, I don't have an idea
Okay.
to spend the money. I just wanted to make it clear that that was, and I apologize, I should have made that clear right away. I don't have any suggestions, and I'm not going to make none at this point.
Okay,
Thank you.
Mr. Preston and Mr. Johnson, you have the floor. My recommendation to you would be to take each item and go down the list like Alderman Johnson recommended in the beginning.
The Canyon Lake Restoration Bypass, we are beginning that project right now. We're working with Game Fish and Parks, the fly fishermen on that project. What we're proposing right now, because Game Fish and Parks has design money available, is that they would take the lead on that, but those are funds that would be spent in 2008. The 37 and 38, those projects are both complete, and those two numbers represent uncommitted funds. So those are funds that are available back to the 2012 program. I guess economic development, I really can't comment on that. I think maybe you've received the information that you were looking for on that. I don't know. Okay.
Keep going.
Downtown parking ramps, I guess I haven't been closely involved with that. The one project that I am working on, the expansion of the ramp down
Mr.
here,
Johnson,
we're not
just
looking at 2012
did we
funds.
skip 39?
That was economic development, Mr. Chairman. That was, did you want more information on that, Mr. Meyerhouse?
I think Mr. Johnson's question, are those funds going to be expended this year? I think that's the bottom line.
You would agree?
Okay.
I'm going to say they are committed because
Okay,
of...
that's fine.
Okay.
Downtown parking ramps, of course, I think, the St. Joe and 6th Street parking or project is one of those, and I can't really, I don't really know the status of that. What I was commenting on is that the one project that I am working on, the third level for our existing ramp, is we're not proposing funding through 2012. So,
Before you move on, we have a question from Councilmember Hurlbut.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question, and this goes back to item 39. If I recall right, when we budgeted this out, we budgeted, was it 500,000 a year, but then we backloaded. There's $1.2 million in 2010. So, and 500,000 in 09. So then in 08, the 1,081,018, is that an actual number, or is that the remainder of that kind of general? Is this the capture fund, I guess, that we don't know if we're ever going to use it in a given year, but we've allocated for it in case we do?
Mr. Preston?
That, what that $1,081,018 represent is funds not spent in 2007, carried forward and added to, I believe it was $1 million in 2008. You are correct. It's the Opportunity Capture Fund is a portion of this, and the funding for the Cabela's project is part of this, correct?
yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Hurlbut, you still have the floor?
Do we have any kind of an estimate as to what will actually be expended in 2008 in this?
What's that?
Do we have any kind of a ballpark as to how much will be expended in 2008?
Mr. Preston?
On my understanding, the intent is to spend all those funds in 2008.
Yeah, may I?
Yes, please.
Mr.
Actually,
Chairman.
let me ask the chair.
If you have a question for Mr. Meyerhouse, I'm not trying to stifle the conversation, but I think Mr. Preston answered the question that the intent is to use all those funds in 2008. If you have a question for Mr. Meyerhouse, we can bring him back up.
I would like Mr. Meyerhouse just to address
Jim?
that. Jim Meyerhouse again with Black Hills Business Development Center. I was also on the Capture Fund Committee here that you've designated. Our last accounting for the economic development, these are not precise numbers, but that fund is at zero balance through 2010 right now because of the $2 million that went to Cabela's. So there is no money left in that fund. That's what I was really addressing earlier when I said, you know, we have other needs, but there are no funds in that line item.
Bob, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Meyerhouse. That's all.
Mr. Preston?
The downtown parking ramp, I think RJ probably answered that. We're not sure. I guess if we feel it probably should stay there until we know exactly what the private developer is going to do, as far as the staff recommendation. The soccer fields,
I guess what I do know is that we are going to be getting involved in some discussions here in the very near future. I know there's at least one person here from that organization. I can't necessarily represent when those funds might be expended, but they would certainly be, I would anticipate that they would begun to be spent in 2008.
We have a question from Alderman Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, I want to go back to the parking ramp thing because I read in the newspaper somewhere that you referenced the Rushmont.
Yes.
I'm assuming. I read in the newspaper, I don't know, some time ago, a week or two ago, that they mentioned that there's some slow things happen at the city, or some people at the city are being slow in slowing down their projects. So I'm hoping that maybe I could respectfully request that they could bring forward something to show us where they're at with that project. Is if we're going to slow it down, I'd like to know what we're slowing down.
Mr.
thank
Preston?
you, Mayor.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll see if I can give you just a very quick update. Just so you know, we have been having continual meetings with Mr. Shaffey, who of course is the developer with the Rushmont. Currently, the ball is in his court. We basically had, I believe it was Jason Green, Marsh Elkins, and myself had sat down and presented some ideas of how we could proceed, and he was going to go back and check with his financing to see if it would be acceptable to them, and we have not heard back. City Rapid City is doing everything we can to expedite the project, and I would just ask that at this point, I think the Rushmont is still a viable project, and I would just ask you to leave it at least until we have a better feel for where the project's headed. But at this point, I think it's appropriate to leave it in the 08 budget.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I hope that helps.
Ron, do you have another question?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to make sure that we identified that. So, thank you.
Mr. Preston?
Soccer fields.
I guess any questions on that? Like I said, I do anticipate that we will be proceeding with that project in this year. I can't tell you how much would be spent in 2008. Might be able to tell you that in a couple of months, but we're just, I think we're really just kind of getting into the nuts and bolts of that project right now.
Okay.
We do have a couple lights on. We'll go to Alderman Johnson.
Can we just ask regarding the soccer project that in the near future we have an update on that? I think that Alderman Weifenbach asked for an update a couple of weeks ago and there was no response, and I followed through with another request and there was no response. Can we as a council be updated on where we're at on that? And if there is not an opportunity to expend all that money this year, then at some point in the future let's move it to where it's cycled in. Thank you.
Civic Center expansion, that project is due to be completed December 1st. We will spend the money this year. Burn building, that project is completed. I believe, at least according to my records, there's about $23,000 available in uncommitted funds from that project.
Before we move on,
this-
I'm sorry, go ahead, RJ.
This spreadsheet shows a little bit more than that, so we probably need to reconcile our two. But the project is complete. There is some available funding.
Before we move on, we have a couple council lights. We'll go to Councilmember Hurlbut.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is going back to the Civic Center item. As large an item as that is, we've got $15,005,817. The odds of that being exactly how much it costs to complete is probably pretty slim. Can I just have some discussion as to how likely that is to be the exact amount spent? And I don't mean down to the penny, but I mean, what chance is there that that could come in over yet?
Mr. Preston?
First off, you know, it would not take anything from there because we have to have the funds to even enter into a contract. So once we do that, then you pull the funds away. It is not right. Secondly, as far as how much money possibly will be available, I do know that you have a change order coming before Legal and Finance on Wednesday, and I think if the council approves that, you'll have about $30,000 left in the contingency. What's that?
No, there was approximately 90,000 in contingency. This will bring it down to just under 60,000.
Okay.
Yes.
Bob, you still have the floor. We'll next go to Councilmember Hadcock.
I was hearing about the soccer fields, and I know, and I apologize for not knowing your name, but she is with the soccer people. And when they were talking about an update or anything on that, she was raising her hand. So I don't know if we want to hear from her, but I think since we're listening to other people, I think if it's okay with the chair, maybe she wants to give us some of that information on soccer tonight.
That's fine. If the committee would like, do you have a question for Helen Pitch? I mean, is there a question, or you just want her to come up and give an update?
Yeah. Is everybody, I guess you're asking that.
You want a motion or you?
Nope. I don't want a motion. Seems like the committee would like to have Helen Pitch come to the microphone.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Malcolm.
Yes, I'm Helen Pitch from the Soccer Committee. A couple things kind of concerned me is that there's been apparently 2 requests for an update that I'm hearing tonight, and no one from our group has been contacted to give you an update. So I apologize, but we can't give an update if we don't know that you want one. And the other request that I have is, it seems like when you have a meeting like this to get an update on the 2012 funds, that all of the different projects should be notified so we could show up and be here to present to you so you can work with real numbers and get an idea what projects are, or where they're at, or if they're still viable. I agree with Mr. Chapman that people weren't notified. I know our group wasn't notified at all that there was a meeting tonight. I just happened to hear about it. But as in regards to the update of the complex, Mr. Doyle Estes has donated land to the soccer complex, and he is in the process right now and working with Mr. Mr. Green about the agreement. That isn't finished yet, is it, Mr. Green? No. On working with giving the land to the city. And once that's done, then the land will have to be annexed into the city before the city can lease it to the soccer complex. So that's where we're at in regards to the land. And at this time, we're also, the soccer committee is looking at what that land is actually going to cost us. There has to be a FEMA study done on that we will have to do. And there's questions about the infrastructure to the site and within the site. And so we are looking into those issues at this time.
I guess my basic question, Helen, was, sorry. Oh, I thought I was still good. I was on the floor, so I apologize. Is that okay if I thought I still had the floor. I apologize. I guess the bottom line was, you have the expenditures in 2008 at 3.8. We were wondering, bottom line, is this when you're going to start this year expending money for FEMA and these different things? You're going to need some of that money. And I didn't know if we needed to put the 3.8, that's the basic question, or if we need to put 1.8 to start this process. I guess that's what we're looking at tonight. And I guess that was my question.
I think that's a more realistic figure. I think that if we spend a total of $4 million this year, that would be aggressive, and that would be like 1.8 from the 2012 and 1.8 of our own money. I think all the council knows that the soccer committee will be raising about $8 million in addition to the 3.8. So I think it would be realistic to put like 1.8 this year and 2 million next year.
Okay.
For your budgeting purposes.
Okay.
The only thing
Go ahead, Ellen.
I am cautious about saying that is that the funds will be there next year by splitting it off for you just to make sure that.
I guess bottom line is that's kind of what we were looking for, Helen, but I appreciate you coming up front and giving us what you're calling an update, and later on, I guess if we're having people update, maybe we need to have another meeting or something, Malcolm, just for everybody to come up and tell us where they're at and what's happening. I think that's a very positive thing to do for the community and for the city council. Thank you, Ms. Helen.
Next, we'll go to our city attorney, Jason Green. Helen, I think this might concern soccer.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My recollection is that I've seen an email from Mr. Estes indicating that he intended to exercise his option on the land where the soccer fields are proposed. I haven't seen anything that shows that he's actually closed on the land, and have not had conversations with him yet about finalizing an agreement. There have been a number of preliminary conversations with Mr. Estes and with the soccer group about things. One thing I would remind the council is that typically you have required groups that are raising funds to have those funds available at the time we disperse the 2012 funds. So that is an important component of the project, and I don't think it goes forward without that. But I know that they're working diligently to raise those funds.
Thank you, Jason. Next, we'll go to Alderman Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In fairness to the organizations, my expectation wasn't that the organizations defend their projects or tell us where we're at. I think we have professional staff people that are working with some of these organizations, and they should have an idea as to if we need the money in what year. You know, and I'm not even certain to get a wild guess and to move your money, but I think at some point we need to make a reasonable judgment as to, does the money expended this year or not? And I don't want to just put you on the spot and say how much you're going to need. I think we have a staff to do that, and I wasn't at all being the request we had was, I think, internally, Ron, and when he wrote the email, and I did as well, that internally, where are we at with this thing? You know, I know that you would answer that question, but I think we were looking for that information internally as well. So appreciate the job you do, and I guess I wouldn't be interested in moving it just yet, but if we determine that it's not going to be expended this year at some point, I would like to move the money over. And I want to remind the council, this isn't the first time we've analyzed our fund and our plan and moved money, so while I might have caught some people off guard, I'm not sure why I've caught anybody off guard. Thank you.
Next, we'll go to Alderman Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to reiterate the fact that when I requested this information some time ago, it was an internal request.
Okay.
Helen, we didn't expect you to come tonight to give us an update. We obviously didn't expect anyone to come tonight and give us an update. But I would like to ask Helen a question since she's here.
Absolutely.
And giving us an update. And Mr. Green had pointed out a very obvious and important fact. That before the funds are dispersed, there's a requirement for, I think that you were saying that you guys were going to raise $8 million.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in the third year of a 5-year project. And my question to you, Helen, would be is how much money does the Soccer Association have raised right now?
We have raised very little money. The issue has been all along that we have been waiting on land. We have been working with the task force, Mr. Chapman, Ms. Olson, Johnson. We haven't had a meeting for a long time. We requested some, and they haven't taken place. The last discussion we had was when Mr. Estes said he would donate the land, and I'm glad we are having this discussion tonight. Mr. Green, I have been told that he did purchase the land, and if that's not the case, I mean, we're getting to the point where we have some serious concerns, especially what the land is going to actually cost the soccer group. And if the city hasn't had notice that the land has been purchased, I'm concerned about that. We have some options, and we need to be aware of the facts. Mr. Weifenbach, in response to your question of how much money we have raised, we have been trying to raise money, and when we have talked to several people, they have said, do you have land? And we said, no, that's still an issue, and they said, when you have land, come talk to us. So we have been waiting patiently, and I had hoped that this was moving forward with Mr. Estes, and it sounds like tonight it's not as far as I thought it was. So we will be getting together, probably a task force meeting soon with this information tonight. And we are aware that no funds will be expended unless we have matching funds. We've been very much aware of that.
Thank you, Helen. Ron, do you have another question?
I don't have another question for Helen because I feel unfairly putting her on the spot, and I don't want to do that. But I do think that it's important to have this conversation about these, and if we can obviously get together in the future and have a candid, open discussion about how this project moves forward. It is in the third year of a 5-year project, Mr. Chair, and I don't want to ask her any more questions to put her on the spot, but I wouldn't mind doing something in the future on some sort of a timeline. So if we're going to spend $3.8 million that we know, I think the soccer fields, it's an important thing for the city, and I just want to make sure we're having an open discussion about it. So thank you.
Thank you. I agree with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You should be aware that DTH is the corporation of Mr. Estes that has purchased the property. They have executed that, and it is recorded. The annexation of the property was submitted on Friday. It's scheduled to be in front of the Planning Commission on April 10th, and we'll go to the next April council meeting that follows that. Mr. Estes has a copy of a memorandum of understanding addressing the nature of that gift that he's not yet signed, but is still under discussion. My understanding is there's a meeting tomorrow to further discuss that and some related issues to utilities and infrastructure that needs to be addressed. So I want you to all be reassured that yes, the project is moving forward, and the various steps that have to occur are occurring to move this project forward for the acquisition of the land. Mr. Pitts from the Soccer Association has been involved in some of those discussions. I talked to him less than 2 weeks ago, and he was aware of that. May not be all being shared with everyone, but those are the steps that are being taken, and I believe we're making progress.
Thank you, Marcia.
Thank you, Marcia. That was my understanding, too, until what I heard tonight.
Are there any other questions for Helen? Before we move on, then, are there any other ones that we want to go back and discuss? It seems like we get to a certain point, then we go back. So are there any previous ones that we want to discuss before we let them move down the list? Mr. Preston, Mr. Johnson?
Powwow facility. Powwow facility is what we're on next.
I guess there are representatives here from Powwow facility. As far as I think the council is aware of what action has been taken to date, as far as a site is concerned, I guess any progress beyond that, I would refer to Mr. Wiss or Ms. Cook.
Before we allow Mr. Wiss to come up, I don't know if there's some questions for him or not. I'm just going to go back to what the council asked for internally from the staff. What's your assessment if these projects are moving forward? And if there's some specific questions for someone representing those organizations, I think that that's fair. But I think what I've heard the committee ask from the staff internally are, what's your assessment on those dollars being appropriately allocated on this list?
I believe there's continuous progress with that project, and I would anticipate that those funds would either be spent in 2008, 2009. Again, that just is, it's a question of how soon design is completed. So is it all going to be 2008? My guess is no.
We'll go to Alderman Hurlbut.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did a cursory review of the pro forma that Ms. Richards Cook had sent out, and it's a very complex document, spreadsheet, that I haven't reviewed in detail, but one of the items I noticed is it appears that 912 or 914,000 is going to be requested from the city, which is about $100,000 more than the original request. And I guess my question to the applicants would be, am I reading that pro forma right, or are we still within the 812,000 initial request?
That question is for?
I guess either Mr. Wiss or Ms. Daphne Richards Cook.
Pat?
I'm Pat Wiss, and I'm a consultant for the ADA Powwow Gardens and Market, or my company is. We have been retained by ADA about 30 days ago to prepare a schematic design and a cost estimate for the facility, and that report is to be completed by the end of April. And we do expect the cost to be higher. It's been 3 years. The scope has changed somewhat, but we now have a site which the City Council approved about a month ago. So we'll have more specific projections by the end of April. Okay, if I can make one clarification of on 2008, we would expect the money either to be spent in 2008 or under contract to be spent.
Thank you, Pat.
Okay.
Any other questions for ATA at this time? Mr. Preston, Mr. Johnson?
Streets. The street reconstruction, there are 4 projects that we anticipate completing in 2008, will total about $1,500,000. The remaining amount, the 3.37 minus that amount, we would anticipate would be spent in 2009, along with the $300,000 that's allocated there for a project in 2009. So approximately half or a little more than half of that money could be moved to 2009.
Thank you.
Parks and Recreation projects, that's actually, there's a number of projects involved in that line item. So I don't know how you want to handle that one. We did recently bid a project at Roosevelt Park that is a sizable portion of that we're recommending actually at tomorrow's Public Works meeting that be rejected, go back out to bids, but we do anticipate completing that project this year. Outside of that, I believe that most of those projects would be spent in 2008, possibly in 2009.
Thank you.
That's it.
Far as, excuse me, Mr. Chair,
Mr. Preston?
far as the rest of the items, well, those are DCA charges, debt service payments, and I anticipate that that amount of money will be spent for each one of those.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Preston or Mr. Johnson before we turn the conversation to the dais? Alderman Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question for Mr. Johnson. Mr. Robert Johnson. RJ.
Yes.
AKA RJ.
That's
RJ, you mentioned that the park, you're going to deny, you're requesting that the bids be denied for the park that was on the 2012?
Yeah, that was the Roosevelt Park project, and it actually came in over budget, so we're going to have to.
Is there room on some of the other projects to fit that in, or, I mean, do you have some of the projects coming under?
I guess I don't understand your question.
I think I can answer it, RJ. Staff is recommending that we reject the bids because the bids came in too high, not that we need to look for more money to do the project, just to reject the bids because the bids are high. That's my understanding.
Yeah, yes, that's correct. I mean, there were some issues related to that. Number one, we only received one bid on the project. There was a substantial difference between the estimate and the single bid amount. So I think under any circumstances, we would want to rebid that. I guess if there's consideration for increasing that budget, it could certainly be done.
Mr. Weifenbach.
I'd like to ask him another question.
Absolutely.
And my question would be is, you want to rebid this to see if maybe there's some people that can actually meet that bid? Is that your recommendation?
That will be our recommendation at tomorrow's Public Works meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Robert Johnson.
Next, we'll go to Alderman Johnson.
I can see this exercise is going to be a little bit difficult this evening. I would just request that of those projects that we know that the funding is going to be slipped into next year, that before this gets to legal finance, that those recommendations are made by the staff in consultation with the mayor and the finance office as to where we place these things so we can actually get our spreadsheet correct. Thank you.
Alderman Hurlbut.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I hope I might have missed this, but on, I don't know the line item, it's trustee arbitrage services. Wait a minute, it's one down from that. It's debt service payment 2007 issue. I noticed that the 08 through 2012 numbers are all the same, which tells me those are estimates. Is that correct? The number for 07 was 223,460. So as to the 08 number, do we know how much of that is going to be actual?
Mr. Preston?
I anticipate that will be what will be spent in those years.
It is an estimate, though?
Based on our debt service.
Okay, but based on last year, it was 223. Is there a reason for that?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Preston?
Last year was when the bonds were issued, so there might have been for a portion of a year or whatever. Again, for 08 through the balance, I anticipate that the principal and the debt service based on the debt service payment will be what you have listed up there.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Hadcock.
I guess I'm going to go back to Weifenbach's issue from Roosevelt Park. That was a park we've done for like a year and a half, and we have worked with the neighbors in a year and a half in the Parks Department. And my understanding, and I asked Jerry Cole this morning, was he was going to cut back some of the lights, he was going to cut back the gazebo, he was going to cut back the stuff in between the buildings. And I would rather find some funding for this park than move on to the next one in 2012 than cut back all those things that those people been working a year and a half on. And I mean really hard for a year and a half. And Mr. Quaker and I think Lloyd has been to some of those meetings. This is stuff that these people have been wanting not for just a year and a half. They've just been working on this for a year and a half, probably about 5 years or more. So if we can check on RJ, if we are taken away from this park of what we have planned, I would rather take some of the money that we are doing other parks with and finish this park first in the 2012 plan or the Greenway plan or whatever extra money we have. So I guess I would like to know, and that was my question to him, he was going to show us tomorrow what we were going to actually do. So if that's what's going to happen, I guess my request, hopefully of this council, is not to cut back on that, is to find the funding that we can to finish that park, because that is something that on the north side we have been working on for a long time. So if we could look into that, or when that comes up tomorrow, I would request that we figure out if they are taken away from these things because of the RFPs, or if we can take care of that issue without taking those gazebos and those things that are going to make that park a nice park, to see if we can get that done with some of these 2012 funds and some of this money that we do have extra.
I understand the linkage between that conversation that will take place tomorrow and 2012. My recommendation would be, once that item comes up on an agenda tomorrow, if Public Works so chooses, then send that item to look for some additional funding and possibly look at 2012 for funding. But I think tonight, I understand what you're saying, but tonight that item is not on this agenda. Okay. Any other questions or comments for Mr. Preston before we move to the dais? And it seems as if there will be some recommendation or motion, I'm not sure if it could come forward tonight, about moving some of those things that we've kind of identified that some of those funding requests might not happen this year. And then there's some other things on our agenda, and then there might be some items that council members want to bring up to make amendments to the 2008-2012 plan. First, we'll go to Alderman Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a request for Mr. Preston for just an addition to this spreadsheet would be to break out the interest versus the principal on this debt service payoff. I mean, you don't have to do it tonight, Jim. I just would like to see it. Thank you.
Alderman Hurlbut.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that what we've learned tonight is that we're going to need basically another meeting. I went through and just kind of flagged items that I thought we might need better information on, and I've basically flagged all the ones except for the couple items where the project was completed or would not be using those funds. And frankly, I feel it's a little bit embarrassing that we don't have better information at this meeting. So I guess if we need a motion, my motion is going to be to set for another meeting to come back with more detailed information really on the entire 08 column. I don't know if we want to have councilmen actually flag their items that they want further discussion on, but I have just about everything on here flagged. And I think, I'll see what my colleagues think. I'm going to go ahead and float that as a motion that we...
The chair is going to ask, what's the motion? I guess I don't understand what the motion is.
That we schedule another meeting to review more detailed information as to actual expected 08 expenditures, both in terms of whether the money will be spent and in terms of whether these projects are expected to come in within budget or over budget. And I understand that we will have information from ADA in April, and I would perhaps suggest that we schedule the meeting for after that. I don't know who else we're waiting, or how long it's going to take others to get us more detailed information. So the motion is to set for a new meeting when we can have more detailed information on essentially all of these items.
The chair is going to ask for some better clarification of the motion, simply because on all of these, I'm struggling a little bit with what does that mean, that more information on almost all of these items or all of these items. I think if we're going to schedule another meeting and we're going to expect different information from our finance office or RJ in Public Works, I'd like to hear almost specifically what it is that we're looking for, so that we can give them some clear direction so that they can come back with that information at that meeting. I'm not opposed to the motion. I just, I don't know what we're going to get from it if we just say all of these items are flagged and we need more information.
Two
Bob?
things. Number one, are the expenditures expected to be needed to be allocated in '08, whether by contractually or the project actually spending the money? So will they actually be used in '08? And number two, will each of these respective projects be coming in within or below budget? Those are the two things I want to see. Are they going to be spent in '08, and are they going to be within budget?
Spent in '08 and
Within budget or
within
not?
budget. There's a motion on the floor to, I guess it's kind of a complex motion to set another meeting, clear direction to have staff come back with, is that money going to be spent in '08, and is the project going to come under budget? Is there a second for that motion? I'm sorry, is there a second for that motion? The motion on the floor is to set another meeting date, come back with that specific information about will the money be spent in '08, and will these projects come under budget? Discussion on that motion. We'll go to Alderman Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would it be appropriate to assign this to one, like a future Wednesday when we have the council meeting that updates us on, and we could just request that anybody's project that has not been started or whatever the motion would, I mean, so we don't have, I mean, just another informational meeting. That's what I was looking for.
That'd be fine.
Could it be moved to an informational meeting?
That'd be fine.
Period of time, would that be appropriate?
The chair will take some latitude and answer. I guess we could move it to an information meeting. The point of the annual 2012 meeting is to make amendments. I don't know why we want to then move this discussion to an information meeting. Those information meetings are scheduled out sometime now. I mean, we can surely move some of those, but if we're going to wrestle with this issue tonight, the chair would like to see us set a date, move forward with these requests, and actually do that as opposed to just trying to take it to an information meeting where we have an hour. But I'll listen to what the rest of the council has to say. If you'd like to make that as a substitute motion, you surely can.
No, after that information I won't, but
Okay.
because I agree with where Alderman Hurlbut's going. We don't have enough information to, I don't think tonight was, like I mentioned earlier, a night for people to fill us in. They didn't have any warning of what's going on, I think. But if we do move it to another meeting, I would obviously like to see the people that are the heads of these projects and the staff that are involved in these projects be involved in giving us the information that we need and
Okay.
that they requested, and I will support a separate meeting. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Alderman Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I tend to agree with the motion, but it's somewhat wordy. I believe we need to continue this meeting and all the items on the meeting. And I believe that we ought to have the information in front of the council when we make these decisions. I believe we have coming forward more information regarding Canyon Lake, more information regarding a tremendous amount of money we're going to spend on solving our water problem in the city of Rapid City. I think we ought to have this information compiled before we actually really make a decision. And I don't know any other way to put this. I've essentially, since I've been on the council, and this is my 14th year, I've asked for actuals on capital improvements regarding revenues and things like that. We have gotten an update, and we've actually moved within the spreadsheet most every year when we determine when the funding should go. I'm kind of like Bob. I mean, I'm somewhat surprised that we were totally unprepared for this meeting. This is the information that I'd like to have before I move forward. So if we simply ask the council president to reschedule another meeting, bring all these items forward, ask for the information to be brought forward by the staff, it would benefit me as a council person, and I think it would the other councilmen as well. So we're already at 9 o'clock. I don't think we're going to get done tonight. I think that we need to recognize that.
Next, we'll go to Alderman Kroger.
What's the damn info? I didn't get that.
Well, I've been a little confused on the, or have some problems with the motion on the floor, but after some further thought, I can probably support having another meeting, because I don't know where we're going to go tonight, but if we do have another meeting, we need to notify everybody, because when this 2012, this go-around of 2012 took place in 2005, Alderman Johnson, Alderman Chapman, Alderman Olson, and myself met with every one of these groups and organizations and went through their projects with them. And one thing that we did say, and we told every one of them, is the funding that we're approving for you is the funding that you're going to get. It doesn't matter if it's 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, or 2010. That's what we're approving, and that's the only dollar amount. And, you know, tonight I'm hearing that, well, number one, we got some city projects coming forward that want more funding. We got a couple other projects that are coming forward that are probably going to be short of money. So we need to open this all. If we're going to look at increased funding for a couple, then we need to basically open it up for all the other projects that haven't been funded yet and say, gates are open, guys. Come and see what you can get. I mean, so I don't know where we're going tonight, but it certainly is. We're not going to get accomplished anything tonight. Let's put it that way. So I can support the motion.
Next, we'll go to City Attorney Jason Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to reiterate what Alderman Johnson said. I think the appropriate motion should be a continuation motion rather than to set another meeting. You haven't taken any action, so you haven't made a recommendation to the council yet tonight, and I think that's an important part of your annual meeting. So continuation is probably more appropriate.
Go to Alderman Hurlbut.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and that will be my motion. And I guess I wanted to add an item I forgot to add, and I think it's important that we get the O&M costs that have been requested to be considered as part of the analysis. And I think, as Alderman Johnson alluded, there are significant potential needs out there with regard in particular to the Canyon Lake Dam and the water system that I think we need some account of whether there will be requests for 2012 funds or needs for 2012 funds to address those projects and whatever other potential needs may be on the horizon. So I would ask that that information be provided as well as part of my motion.
Bob, you made the original motion, so I think it would be improper for you to make the continuation motion.
I would offer that motion, Mr. Chairman, keeping this item, request the council president work with staff to set another meeting to process.
It's been moved and seconded to continue this meeting and have the council president work with staff to come up with a meeting date. And I think a part of that motion also is to notify all of those who are in the 5-year plan so that they could be at that meeting as well. Is that the spirit of the motion? And to include all of that information that requested. I wrote it down. I will make sure that staff understands that information. I think it's about what's going to be spent in 2008. Will these projects come in under budget and the O&M cost? Is that the spirit of the motion? Any discussion on the continuation motion? Go to Alderman Johnson.
Mr. Chairman, specifically, I just think that the staff should visit with the organizations to find out what their needs are. I'm not certain that they need to come down and explain where they're at. I think if that information is worked with the professional staff, they should know when that money needs to be expended, and that should not be that difficult.
Okay. Councilmember Hadcock.
If we are going to continue this, I guess I do want to hear from those people, and I do want to hear that information. That way we're all on the same page. On dam information, I don't know how you're going to figure out 2012 costs or anything on a dam information when Robert's just trying to work on the reconstruction, let alone doing the put the bentonite in, so he won't have those costs until he gets a design, which is probably another year if I'm correct, Mr. Ellis, from your presentation. So I'm trying to figure out how we're going to talk about that in a 2012 plan. To be fair, I know this is a continuation motion, but the people that are saying that this meeting was unprepared is unfair to the people that prepared this meeting and did all the work on this, because some people I know that we contacted today we didn't even remember we had this meeting at 7:30, so let's all be fair to the people that were unprepared as well. It was some of the people that wanted this continued. So, long story short, I think this was a prepared meeting. I think once we get into the meeting, in all fairness to the people that have changed the motion, we get into them and then we kind of see some of the stuff we need to add. Because even myself, with looking at this with 2012, I didn't think I had that many questions. And then once we start talking about it, I understand that part. But Malcolm, I think you were prepared, and the people that have done this meeting have been prepared. The O&M are good suggestions, Mr. Quaker, and this continuance is a good continuance. But again, let's be fair to the people that did the first meeting. Some of this could have been a little bit different, but sometimes when we email, I think we need to put our thoughts down on that email, or at least call the council president or the mayor and tell them to put them on these items, or Kay, because some of this stuff that we are asking, now that we're looking at it, could have been on here in the first place and saved us more time in the second meeting. So, and Mr. Quaker, in all fairness on yours, the O&M was requested, so I appreciate that, and those are good costs. But long story short, I will support the motion. Mr. Kroger made some good points on that, and I appreciate that, Mr. Kroger. But again, the preparedness of this meeting, I think he did a good job. I think he's trying the best. The people on this, as council leaderships, are trying their best to do the best job they know how and get a hold of everybody. But we have to be responsive because, like I said, a lot of us forgot the times and that we even had one tonight. So let's be fair to those guys.
We still have some lights on the board, but before we move forward, I'm going to make a comment. Deb, I appreciate you coming to my defense to say that you thought that I was prepared. I'd like to think that I am always prepared, but I don't think this meeting is about me. This meeting is about the council or the committee coming to do the committee's work. So I don't think it's anything about an individual being prepared, even though I appreciate your coming to my defense, but I don't think that I need any defense. Next, we'll go to Karen Olson.
Mine is a question. It's not related. It is sort of indirectly related to the continuation motion. I just want to make it
before you start, Karen. You know, I don't know, about 45 minutes ago, in my mind, I threw the rules out the window. And you can speak to the continuation or you can speak.
The only part of this, I'm going to support the continuation motion. But I think it needs to be crystal clear. Are these reports coming from our staff, or are these reports coming from individual organizations who have projects that are yet to be done? And if there's any question about that, I just want to make it perfectly clear that at the next meeting, we either have only staff reporting, or we have a combination. But it needs to be crystal clear. So that if, for example, if Daphne Richards Cook is here once again, in other words, everybody needs to have the same opportunity. So it needs to be crystal clear whether or not it's going to be strictly staff or whether it is going to be a combination of staff and individual organizations reporting, and I just want that defined. Because I'm unhappy when people show up at a meeting and then we need to treat everybody the same, and the fact that people didn't know, that works to everyone's disadvantage. So what is this motion? Because I hear Mr. Johnson saying we just want staff reporting, and I'm hearing other people saying let's let everybody report. So let's just define what the terms are.
Someone who's on the board, Johnson, Quaker, Hurlbut, does someone have an answer to Karen's question? We'll go to Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that, number one, of course, everybody ought to be identified. I think staff should apprise themselves of where each of the projects are, but that those project people should probably be here in case there's need for further questioning of them. So I think we give everybody the opportunity. We may not need input directly from everybody, but certainly I don't want to deny them the opportunity. But I think staff can do a good job of apprising themselves in advance to where that can probably streamline the discussion. And then I just have one comment. I just wanted to say that to the extent my comment about feeling embarrassed was implied to be directed at any person. I did not mean that. I think all of us got to looking at this and realized we had more questions than we thought coming in, and I don't think that's anybody's fault. And in particular, you as the chair, Mr. Chairman, I meant no finger pointing whatsoever. I think this is, and actually it's becoming apparent to me that this has been a good meeting in that though nothing got done, we've identified things that need to get done. So those are my comments.
We'll go to Alderman Johnson.
Hopefully something did get done. I think we're going to resolve some things. The one thing I want to say is I could have asked some of this information prior to it, but, you know, I went back and we got the spreadsheet for 2012 at 5 o'clock p.m. tonight, and that put me at a disadvantage, and I assumed that we would have this information prior to this, you know, and that is fairly late information, and I think in a more timely fashion, I would have probably sent out an email and said, you know, we need to update our list. And my assumption was we would do that because we've done that every year. Thank you.
What's the wishes of this committee? I'm sorry. I take offense at some of these comments. I do. I just do. We didn't get a list until 5 o'clock. My gosh, this list is on our website. This list is posted everywhere. Are council members so in need that we can't go out and find any information or get any public information that's already there? Mr. Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a clarification, just be sure that I understand that we do what we want, what you want. But like on the downtown parking ramps, you would like to know if Mr. Shaffey is going to do that project in '08, and if he's going to come back and ask for more than $2.8 million. And the second part of that question is on the O&M. You're only talking about O&M, I believe, as we did in the first go-around, that would impact the general fund, I believe. Is that correct? Just want clarification.
Mr. Preston, I think it's unfairly stated to say that the downtown parking ramps that the 2012 committee and the council subsequently approved is Mr. Shaffey's project. We did that universally looking at downtown parking. We didn't do that in conjunction with the Rushmont. That's for downtown parking. If that plan goes south, there's still money in our 2012 plan to do something with parking in the downtown of our community. I don't look at that money as being necessarily tied to Mr. Shaffey, so if you say his project doesn't go, that we could then move that money, I would hope that the city would then look for other opportunities to do parking downtown. I don't know if I answered your question or if you wanted someone else to answer the question as well. Think about it. We'll go to Mr. Quaker.
I'm sorry.
Sam?
I'm going to move the previous question. Move to call the question.
Do we need a second on calling the question? The question has been called and it's been seconded. Is there any objection? No discussion? All in favor of calling the question indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? No. The question has been called with Mr. Weifman voting no. The question is to continue the meeting, have the council president work with staff to provide all of that information that I think I've got a pretty good handle on, and then work with staff to set another meeting date for the continuation of this meeting. Or is there any discussion at this point, Jason? All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? The motion carries. The chair would entertain a motion to adjourn. It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. Any discussion? All in favor indicate by saying aye. All opposed? The meeting is adjourned. think they said that about every project up there. That's my opinion. Tom, I think that was,
Malcolm?
I think that was.
You did, what, we've had at least 12 of these. You brought the same information that we've always brought, so I mean, you did nothing.
Ah.
Well, what I would like to have, since we're having another meeting, is a 5-minute or less presentation from every group that's going to be funded this year and tell us we're on track.
I can't imagine a group coming saying, I don't need the money.
Well,
I mean,
no,
but I
can't
understand
either.
what you're
But
saying.
I mean, to say,
I understand.
to say we're on track and, you know, that